see if anyone else is
Thank you,
seeking
Chair,
the
and
call.
thank you, Senator Shoebridge. I have some questions about the Chinese headquartered technology company DJI, if any relevant officials need to come forward. Firstly, is the department aware of the developments in the United States, in particular last year, in relation to the company?
Which particular developments?
Well, in October last year, the Pentagon blacklisted DJI from providing any of its drones to the US military on the basis of a Pentagon assessment that the company is secretly controlled by the People's Liberation Army.
Yes.
That followed previous sanctions from the US government more on human rights grounds, because they assessed that DJI is complicit in the surveillance and repression of Uyghur people in Xinjiang.
Yes. Yep.
So is the department aware of those developments, and has the department had any communication with your American counterparts on those issues?
Whether Mr Hansford can come forward in terms of, as this relates to critical technology that's got national security implications, applications. I'm certainly, now that you've reminded me, I'm certainly familiar with those developments. Whether we've had our own, let's see if Mr Hansford's about. Whether we've directly engaged with counterparts. So our counterparts wouldn't be the Pentagon. Our counterparts would be the Department of Homeland Security. That's point one. Point two, we operate in our system of protective security governance slightly differently, I suspect, from how the US government works. We have a central framework known as the Protective Security Policy Framework that is vested currently with the Attorney General's Department. It's their job to provide guidance for all agencies to give consideration, whether it's social media applications, cameras, drones and the like. So we would work in the ordinary course with the Attorney General's Department, I think it's fair to say. So the Senator asked two questions. Are we aware of those American developments? I think the short answer is yes. Yes. We can deal with that. Have we had any contact with those departments? My sense would be probably not, because we wouldn't deal ourselves with the Department of Defence, but we might have had dealings with the Department of Homeland Security. Can you shed any light on that, Mr Hansford?
So not on the specific company. We talk with Homeland Security and indeed Quad and Five Eye partners about critical technologies more generally on a very consistent basis. Even in the last month, I've spoken to Homeland Security on critical tech and cybersecurity issues.
Okay. Has the government sought any advice from the department about DJI?
Well, the advice that we would provide would go to a broader interagency
Sorry
process.
to interrupt, that wasn't my question. My question was, has the government sought any advice? Not what advice, I can come to that, but just as a threshold issue.
But even in terms of the process whereby advice is provided, the Minister who owns the Protective Security Framework is the Attorney General. So questions regarding protective security in the first instance should be directed to the Attorney General's Department.
And I plan to pursue this issue with them as well, but this is in part a cybersecurity issue.
Understood.
And so I'm interested.
And our expertise largely, in this instance, is focused in the cyber area, the backlinks, etc. We would, in the ordinary course, provide that advice to the Attorney General's Department.
Yes. So has either the Attorney General's Department or the Minister sought your advice on the cybersecurity risks?
On those drones?
They have. When did they seek that advice?
In relation to
DJI specifically.
The drones. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I thought you meant just generally. I haven't received advice or a request for advice on DJI from the Attorney General's Department.
How about from your Minister?
I'll just have to go back over our records and check, to be precise, Senator. But that's in relation to the policy mission. There's a separate discussion about whether or not the department, to support our corporate area, including in the discussions through the Government Security Committee, that the coup would talk to the Attorney Generals about. So there's two issues here that we just have to make sure that we provide an accurate answer.
Okay. Well, I'll accept that on notice.
Thank you.
As you'd be aware, you've received questions on notice from me about whether your department uses these drones. Or other devices made by the company. They make a range of technology devices, including gimbals, which is for filming videos. The answers come back that both the department itself, including its communications function, and the Border Force have a number of these drones and other related accessories. Now that you're aware of the US government blacklisting in two respects, do you think it's appropriate that first the department itself continues to use these products?
In short, no, but that's a matter that properly... So internal usage is a matter for the Chief Operating Officer, so I'll get Ms Saunders to address that, and then Mr Hansford engages externally with AG, the Attorney General's Department and others on policy settings. But Ms Saunders, in relation to the question on notice that we provided.
So Senator, directly into your question in terms of is it appropriate for us to be using the capability, in light of the concerns that have been generated over recent weeks, we have actually suspended the use of that capability.
Great. Look, I really welcome that. I'm pleased to hear that. We'll come later to a kind of a more holistic way of dealing with this, other than you just kind of responding reactively to questions on notice that I and others submit. But that's welcome. Does that answer apply to the Border Force as well?
Yes, it does, Senator.
Great. So Border Force has stopped using the drones?
Correct.
As of when did Border Force stop using the drones?
I have to take on notice precisely when. We've had conversations with the ABF this week in terms of a departmental position, which they've responded to. So I actually issued a directive this week indicating that they are not to be used. Now,
Right.
when ABF actually ceased using it, I'd have to confirm.
Not sure it was this week, given today's Monday, but...
It's last
Yes,
week.
might have been last week, yeah. Thank you. Again, that's very welcome. I'm very pleased to hear that. That wasn't the Border Force's initial response. When I first put the question on notice to them, they just came back and stated that they were using them. And then in response to subsequent media inquiries, they again said they were going to continue to use them as part of a trial. What has changed between then and now? What has led you or the department to make this decision and direct Border Force to stop using it?
Combination of factors, Senator, but obviously we've been closely monitoring the reaction across the government. Obviously we're all alive to what Defence's position has been in regards to this matter, and we've been engaging with Defence in regards to the review they're undertaking. We'll be working with them and other partners to satisfy ourselves as to the implications of the use of this technology before it is used.
Yeah, you mentioned Defence. The article about Border Force was subsequent to the Defence announcement that they had suspended their use of it. I think it was a Saturday. It was Ellen Winnett in The Australian who published an article on Saturday saying Defence had stopped using it. In response to that, I called on ABF to stop using it, and it would have been the Monday or the Tuesday of the following week that ABF provided their quote to The Australian that they were continuing to use it. So they still had the benefit of the Defence Department's position at that point and were continuing to use it. So obviously something subsequent to that article appearing has changed.
So we've looked at it from a portfolio perspective, and we took a departmental view that we would suspend the capability, and ABF have adhered to that direction.
Great. Well, look, as I said, I really welcome that. Is this going to be do you have any visibility, maybe this is a question for Mr Hansford, any visibility as to whether this is going to be a government-wide directive, whether other departments and agencies are also going to cease using the drones?
That's a question better directed to the owner of the protective security policy.
I will ask them too, but I'm just asking for your level of awareness. Has it been discussed with other departments? Are they contemplating doing what you've done? Are you unilaterally doing this on your own?
Ms Saunders, that we don't chair the Government Security Committee, but if there's any light you can shed on the discussion currently underway in the Government Security Committee, which tends to be all of the protective security advisors across departments and agencies, but I'd be reluctant to get too far ahead of where the Attorney General's Department may wish to explain their thinking when they appear on Tuesday and Wednesday.
The Secretary's comments are correct. So AGD has lead, but of course there is a technology committee that has been formed, of which Home Affairs contributes, and of course we'll participate in those conversations as they progress.
Okay. All right. Well, I will pursue that with AGD because, as you note, they are the protective security policy framework holder now, post the machinery of government changes. Let's talk more broadly about the policy issue here.
No, sorry, just to be sorry, Senator. The protective security policy framework has been vested with the Attorney General's Department from day one.
Okay.
It was not transferred back.
Noted. Duly noted.
Thank you.
So let's just talk about the wider policy issue here, which is obviously, in part, the department has made this decision in response to the revelations in the United States, but that happened in October last year. It seems that this particular action for the department is more linked to me putting questions on notice on it earlier this year, and had I not done so, it's possible that this would have gone unaddressed. Don't we need a more of a proactive approach in assessing cybersecurity and technology risks posed by companies like these, so we're not just reliant on a question on notice being fired through the Senate?
In short, I wouldn't dispute that the premise or the characterisation. Technologies moved, particularly platform-based and cloud-based technologies have moved rapidly. A number of us across the Five Eyes particularly are engaged on this very question. Those sorts of decisions and choices will come with a cost, because in some cases the use case tallies and the cost from a value for money point of view would suggest that you use a particular type of technology. One thing I can say in relation to both critical technology, cyber security, new and emergent technologies, that we're engaged very closely with our partners in the Defence Department, the intelligence agencies, as well as with the Attorney General's Department. And the question I think governments of all persuasions and across democracies generally will have to confront is how directive they start to become in terms of saying, here is a type of kit or a type of technology that you will not use. What that means in terms of extant contracts, what that means in terms of soon-to-be finalised trials that might lead to a procurement, what it might mean to future procurement, all has to be managed by you as the accountable authority. You saw Secretary Jones, for instance, make a very clear direction recently in relation to the removal of a particular social media application from all government devices and systems. I don't want to speak for her, it's really her call, not mine, because she's the delegated authority under the PSPF, or the Protective Security Policy Framework, but I suspect we're going to have to consider more of those types of approach. Well, I think we have to consider that approach more ubiquitously, simply because of the connectivity of devices, the connectivity of technologies, the way in which a drone or a camera or some kind of imaging device could potentially beacon back or send its data back to a host server. And so I suspect, this is a degree of conjecture on my part, you'll find more uniform and more ubiquitously restrictive approaches being considered. But that said, we're working through it very carefully and purposefully across all of the range of risks and the benefits of the different approaches.
Thank you. Look, I really welcome that. I think that is the right direction to head in, and I look forward to following up with you on that in subsequent round of estimates to see how we've gone in putting that in place. Just a follow-on question, which is particularly relevant for Mr Hansford while he's at the table. Government's obviously made a decision in relation to these devices, but also the cameras, Hikvision and Dewar, social media applications, TikTok that you referenced, Mr Pizzullo, that they are not safe to be in Australian government premises or on Australian government devices or used by Australian government departments and agencies. Have you turned your mind, Mr Hansford, at all as to whether or not that requirement should be pushed out through critical infrastructure providers as well? If it's not safe for government because it represents a data security or espionage risk, is it safe for critical infrastructure providers to be having these cameras or these apps or these drones?
So I think in terms of market interventions, our first piece of intervention, if you like, in a regulatory sense, was on the 15th of November 2021, where we put out critical technology supply chain principles, which effectively says for the entire economy, here are some security elements that should be considered in procurement, particularly in the supply chain. Subsequently then, for critical infrastructure on the 17th of February, Minister for Home Affairs put out the risk management program requirement for critical infrastructure. The overwhelming evidence we got before the parliamentary committee that you were a chair of previously, Senator, was to create principles-based regulation in the first instance to really make sure that at a principles level across multiple infrastructure assets, people were looking at security, so we can think about the framework, one element of which is the definition of material hazards. And then within that, there's different material hazards which go to the protection of the functioning of infrastructure, one of which is the storage of data offshore and as a consideration as a material risk. Another one goes to the remote control or the ability to access an infrastructure asset from offshore, and it's at that principle level that program goes to, rather than specifically prohibiting or being more directive on particular types of technology. And then finally, there's also a supply chain element, particularly for those large suppliers who might fundamentally impact the functioning of infrastructure. So the government's kept it at a principles level, and that's in direct response to the evidence before the parliamentary committee.
Yeah, and I guess my question is, if the government made a decision that this should be required, this should be mandated, that it shouldn't, these product shouldn't be used by critical infrastructure. Does the legislation as it stands give the government sufficient power to do that, or would amendments be required to provide the government with that
For infrastructure operators, or in relation to the government itself?
No, for infrastructure operators. If you wanted to mandate that critical infrastructure providers or a subset of them, SONs, for example, should not have TikTok on their work-issued devices, should not have high-vision cameras, should not have DJI drones, does SOCI allow you to impose that requirement, or would amendments be required to the Act?
Without giving legal advice, Mr Hansford, I think you and I have discussed this. We think there's sufficient ambit, do we not?
I think that in terms of the risk management program, a Minister of Home Affairs could declare a particular device to be a material risk that then a company would have to mitigate. So I think it could be done in that construct. Just noting my previous advice that it's kept at principles based, I think it would be open to a minister to consider that pending any legal issues that might arise.
Can I...
About to give you the wind-up, Senator.
Sure. Just a concluding comment on this one then. Can I just commend for your consideration and also the government's consideration, considering whether it's appropriate to do that? Because it seems to me, as a matter of logic, that if these products are not safe in the Australian government, that we shouldn't be comfortable about them being used in critical infrastructure providers either, especially SONs as a subset, which obviously is, is the most sensitive component of them.
The other available technique might be using Section 32 of the Security of Critical Infrastructure Act, which is a ministerial direction, dependent on an adverse security assessment from ASIO.
Good point. And of course, nothing precludes critical infrastructure operators in the meantime taking their own initiative and sensing the tea leaves and getting rid of these themselves. And I would encourage them to consider doing that before any punitive or regulatory action is necessary.
So, Senator, without extending on that very point, I would draw attention to the Quad agreement struck just over the weekend, whereby the 4 Quad partners, for instance, in each of our jurisdictions have agreed joint principles to secure software supply throughout our supply chain. If I was looking to vend to the government, I'd be reading those principles to say, if the government's not going to tolerate high-risk software in the development of code that is in services and products that I vend to government, then as a vendor I need to smarten up, and whether by principle or by direction, they'll probably impose that on banks and telcos, etc. So the signals are out there. And that just one instance of secure software, for instance, was announced by the 4 Quad leaders in Hiroshima just, 24 hours ago.
Point well made. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Senator Shoebridge.
Oh, thanks, Chair. I thought I'd moved off Vera 2R, but I can't help myself, and I have 2 more questions.